Igor and the OLAP team for organizing this brown bag session and having me join today. I really appreciate it. Thank you everyone else who's joining from wherever you are, university, campus, or somewhere else you may be. I look forward to this session. I hope I'm sharing some new ideas and content, but if not, then at least I'm sharing my own practice, and then you can compare it to your own online learning practices. So with that, let me go ahead and share my screen. Here we go. Perfect. So today I'm going to be talking about Learner Center online course design. And as I mentioned before, these are some of it is my own practices, and part of this presentation is also a reflection on a publication that I have with some colleagues related to the design of Learner Center design in a learning management system, which we are all using as part of our connection to UTK. So as Igor mentioned, my name is Dr. Enilda Romero-Hall, and I'm an associate professor in the Theory and Practice in Teacher Education department. Here's my email. You can feel free to connect with me. I'm also on Twitter, where I connect with other instructional designers, online teaching and learning practitioners, and just academics in general. So my practice in online teaching and learning has a foundation on what's called critical digital pedagogy. And as defined by Jesse Stomel, critical digital pedagogy is an approach to teaching and learning that fosters agency and empowers our learners. And it really aims at critiquing oppressive power structures that we may not be aware of, or that we may be aware of in our online courses. For me personally, critical digital pedagogy considers a series of different aspects. So first and foremost, the learning experience focuses on the practice on community and collaboration. So learners are coming into the learning experience to interact with one another, to interact with the content, and interact with the instructors. It also means that we acknowledge, recognize, and value diverse international voices. So we think about ways of communicating that allow for collaboration that happens across different cultural and political boundaries. In traditional learning environments, we also have the learners put the instructor as sort of like that single voice, the center of the instruction. But with elements of critical pedagogy, we are considering the learning experience as a collective of different voices. So individuals are coming to the classroom and sharing their experiences. Based on my experience as an instructor, I find that many students often are hesitant to share their experiences because they may feel that it doesn't add to the learning experience, but it's always important to encourage them to bring their own voice. And then ideally, when we integrate critical digital pedagogy into instruction, we consider the learning outside, how it applies outside the traditional institution of education. So how is what the student is learning applicable to them in their life, in their profession, to their community, or to their society? So I tend to create a connection to giving back to the outside world. So giving back to something that is outside just doing it for an assignment, doing an assignment for a grade. So personally, I consider 3 elements in my critical digital pedagogy. First is the 3-tier design approach, which is what I'm going to cover today during the presentation. I also consider elements of culturally relevant pedagogy, because culture is such an important part of me in terms of being an instructor and an academic. And then I consider elements of feminist pedagogy, because it helps me reflect and think on my practice as an instructor with equity and inclusion for all in mind. But as I mentioned before, I'm going to be focusing today on that 3-tier design process. Before moving forward, I would like to acknowledge my collaborators, Wei Jing, who is an instructional designer at Arkansas Tech University, who was the lead for this publication, and my colleague, Dr. Pauline Salim Muljana, who is an educational technology program manager at Digital Promise. And I actually think that as an academic, being able to collaborate with practitioners, it just keeps me and it keeps my instructional design skills at a different level. So I really enjoy collaborating with practitioners. Again, it just enhances my level of my practice and my teaching. And this is our publication. And what I will do at the very end is that I will provide a link to it so that you can save the PDF. But I just wanted to share it here. So the 3-tier design process consists of really key elements that if taken care of adequately at the beginning of the design process or at the creation of a course in a learning management system, it just allows the process to run more smoothly and to keep the learner in mind as you're going through these different elements. So it starts with the design part, which takes into consideration the creation of learning objectives. It then moves on to thinking about the learning activities or how learning activities are designed. There is an element of alignment, which just connects the learning objectives, the activities, and the assessment. And then it considers elements of accessibility. It then moves on to the development process, in which the instructional language is key. How do we present content? So much of our content is presented on screen. And then it considers the organization of materials. So I'll be presenting some of my own course materials. And then it ends with communication, communication with the instructor, and communication with classmates, access to resources, and the overall navigation of the course. So let's go ahead and get started with the design components. So as part of the design component, the first one is to consider the write-up of learning objectives. And for this approach, I always use the SMART acronym. SMART referring to making sure that your learning objective is specific, is measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And what that means is that you are thinking of a specific, what are you referring to in terms of a specific? What content does the learning objective refer to? What topics or what practice? Measurable, how often should the learner be able to perform that task, or how much of that content are you wanting the learner to know? And I'll provide an example in a minute. Achievable, we want learners to achieve either knowing the content or practicing a task with 100% accuracy. But is that always going to be the case, or do we want to provide some flexibility? Like, do we want to say with 90% of accuracy? Relevant, how is it relate to the instruction that the learners are being presented with? And then time bound. Do you want the learners to know that to reach that objective within a week, within a specific module? Do you want them to achieve it within a course, or do you want it to achieve it within a specific academic year? So SMART makes it really hard to makes it really easy to understand elements of a learning objective. But ideally, to write a good learning objective, you actually scribble that a little bit or change the organization a little bit. So you actually start with a specific, measurable, then move on to time bound, make it relevant, and make it achievable. So an example of this would be, for my students, it would be, learners will be able to list. That verb is really important. I want them to list. I don't want them to describe. I don't want them to define. I want them to list. 5 instructional design models by the end of a specific module with 90% accuracy to increase their awareness of instructional design methods, right? So again, my learning objective is specific because I want the learners to list. It's measurable because I want them to list 5 instructional design models. It's bound to a module, and I want them to do this with 90% accuracy, and then I create the relevant because it relates to the content that they are covering, right? So SMART is a great way to consider all the elements that we hope that the students achieve within a specific learning objective. But I've had many conversations with colleagues, with learners, with instructional design students as to whether learning objectives are important or not. I've actually seen this recently on our Twitter community. And in a personal note, I feel that learning objectives are important for me as an instructor and also as a designer, because it gives me guidance as to where I want the instruction to go. But it also can provide guidance for the students. I leave this question for you to reflect on, and maybe we can talk a little bit about at the end of the conversation. Do you always present your learning objectives to the learner, or do you use them yourself as a way to guide your instruction, but don't necessarily share them with the learners? Now, transitioning from objectives to learning activities, the learning activities are an opportunity for our learners to have an opportunity to practice. So as Esmeralda defined here, it is an opportunity to work on tasks of increasing complexity with feedback on their performance, right? So ideally, the learners are presented with some sort of instructional content, have a learning activity, are provided feedback, and then have an opportunity to improve on that learning task. So 2 different approaches that I have considered in my teaching of hybrid and online courses are these 2 options. The first one, in which the learners are able to complete a task for practice. So for example, I've taught my multimedia development course in the past, and students have to create an infographic for a practice task. And during that infographic creation process, they learn about the tool that they're going to use, the software that they're going to use. They practice the data collection process, and ways in which they can present that content in a way that is instructional. Then they receive feedback on the task, and then they get to complete a similar task for final submission. So they get to go through the process of creating an infographic again, but now with the opportunity, having the opportunity to receive feedback and practice on it. In other instances, tasks that may require a longer commitment period, so maybe perhaps a semester-long process, the students may be asked to write an instructional design approach to a problem that is occurring. And that is a pretty big project, right? They have to write the problem statement, they have to do the learner's analysis, they have to complete a task analysis. So there are multiple layers to this assignment. So instead of saying, well, here's your assignment and it's posted for the very end of the semester and it's due on such and such day, what I like to do is I like to break the task into deliverables that are done throughout the semester, giving the student the opportunity to complete a portion of the assignment, receive feedback, resubmit the revised version, add another portion of the assignment, and go through the process until all the elements of the task are completed. So again, it refers back to this idea that learners have an opportunity to work on tasks of increasing complexity while getting feedback on their performance. So once as an instructor, I have connected my learning objectives with my learning activities, then something that I have done in the past is the creation of a table of alignment. So the table of alignment is a great practice when you are either teaching a course for the very first time and you're thinking through the process of developing this course from beginning to end. Or you may be teaching a course that you have never taught before, so it's a completely different topic for you, or you're just teaching for the very first time. So in the table of alignment, you may have different levels of learning objective. So there may be some course objectives, and then there may be some module objectives. And then you're ensuring that you are connecting your learning objectives with the assessment and the learning activities. So the last thing you want is your students to say, well, we never covered that questions or assessment in the content, right? So this is completely disconnected. How does this relate to the content that I just read? So again, a table of alignment just allows that, smooth transition between all these elements: learning objectives, assessment, and the learning activity. And in the past, actually, as part of getting my courses review for online teaching, I have had to create an entire table of alignment for a course. And I found it to be, rewarding, because it just allowed me to have a full idea of what I was designing before touching the LMS, before putting content on the learning management system. So key takeaways to consider in terms of design and practices that have been useful to me is combining your course syllabus with your course calendar in one file. It just allows the learner to understand where the content may be presented. Of course, I also have my course calendar on Canvas, but just that one single document makes it easy for students to understand that, or learners to understand that this is where you can find all the course content in one file. Listing descriptions of learning activities with consistency throughout all your learning materials. And this has been something that I've just come to realize is that it's very easy to miss information or share incorrect information if I personally am not copy and pasting from one single document. So I'm trying to replicate content in various places. So the most important thing for me in my practice is to describe my learning activities in my course syllabus, and then ensuring that I'm properly copy and pasting to the learning management system. It is also important to clarify what's required and what's optional. I'm the kind of person that likes to provide significant number of additional resources, and it can be overwhelming if students don't know what absolutely they have to read or access versus what they can do on their own time, maybe after the semester has passed or that module has been completed. And then when possible, provide relevant examples or a rubric for an assignment. Again, providing relevant examples is not something that I personally can always do, because I'm always thinking of creative ways in which I can assess my students. So I may not have a relevant example to provide, but I'm probably going to have a rubric that they can use to guide their performance in the assessment. Now, accessibility is, I want to say, a hot topic these days. I think it's a good thing that it's a hot topic. We need more conversations of accessibility. But there's always a minor myth that is related to accessibility, and is that addressing accessibility is something that we do with people with disabilities. But the reality is that accessible learning materials is something that we do for all of us. And I say all of us because I like to include myself in that conversation. I don't know if you noticed, but English is not my first language. And I'm a native Spanish speaker. And I grew up watching TV and movies in English and reading subtitles. So even today, when I watch content on YouTube or a movie, I really enjoy turning on the closed captions, because in some sort of way, it just makes it easier for me to understand. So we have to think about those things when we are creating accessible materials. We are not just putting closed captions on videos for individuals who may have a visual impairment, yes. It may also be for others who may find it beneficial to have a closed caption, like someone like myself, whose English is a second language, right? A few tips related to accessibility is to think about the formatting on content in terms of how the hierarchy of the content is presenting, and avoiding copying and pasting or formatting that may not be easily readable by a computer screen reader, right? I don't know if you noticed, but sometimes when you copy and paste from a PDF, it may not translate the same into a Microsoft Word document. So those type of things may create technical issues for a screen reader. So we need to keep that in mind. Also, full line justifying, it makes it look the text very nicely, because in both sides it just looks very even. But our natural way of reading is from left to right, unless we're from a different culture, it might be differently. But it just makes this justifying just makes from really large or small spaces in sentences, which may affect individuals' reading of the content or the visual flow of the content, make it more challenging for some. We also need to consider the size of our font. I believe 14 fonts should be like the largest. Don't quote me on that, but it should be one of the largest fonts that you should use, and then 12 font for paragraph size. So you don't need something super large, maybe allow for zooming in and things like that, but we need to consider the size of the font that we use as well. A few other accessibility tips. I've already mentioned the closed captioning in multimedia and videos. I've also seen in the last few years a huge increase on the use of alternative text, which was something that I want to say maybe 2 years ago, I wouldn't even see on social media and other types of platforms, but I have seen an increase of alternative text. And the nice thing is that, for example, in our learning management system in Canvas, you can take the time to write a complete description of your image. But if you are the kind of person that just likes to put an image to decorate your content, you can also just say that is a decorative image. So it has no, there's no important content that is of benefit to the learner. Color in text. This is a huge pet peeve for me. For me, it is important for the learner to have a good contrast between the text and the background. And sometimes text color just makes it very challenging for certain individuals to read a text. So I say be very mindful of the use of color in text and how the content in terms of contrast is presented to the learner, right? Even as someone without a significant visual impairment, certain tones of gray and different colors of background make it challenging for me to read text on screen. I was very happy to look through our university website and see that through OIT, you can find a significant number of resources in terms of making sure that your content for any kind of instruction is accessible to your learners. But I was even more impressed to see that there was a guide and evaluation for accessible products. So in terms of accessibility, we need to understand that technology is not neutral. So technology is designed by individuals just like us. And at times that means that you know, the technology may not be accessible to all because we are not perfect. So we need to evaluate the different types of technology that we use for our classroom, for our online environments, to ensure that they are able to be used by all the students who are going to access it. And I know that for the most part, you are probably using the learning management system, but there are other technologies that I use that help me have my class, so like Jamboard, Padlets, and things like that. So we need to get those evaluated. So moving on to development, there's the instructional language that we want to consider for the content that we are presenting, the descriptive versus bullet points. And you can see that the difference between the two different types of content. In the bullet point, the information is presented in a far more organized manner, easier to digest content. Whereas in the descriptive language, you know, I definitely have to read to get exactly what I need to get out of it, right? So again, I think that the use of bullet points is something that is just going to make it easier for the learner to digest the content. In terms of organization of the materials, my personal way of organizing my core content is on modules. And in each module, I am likely to include my rubric, learning materials, readings, link to external content, any assignments that I may have, links to forums, sample assignments, and resources that may benefit to the learner. This is what my course may look like in a Blackboard learning management system. And transitioning from Blackboard to Canvas, that was something. You know, I would start with my start here, then move on to my announcements. I'm a huge proponent of announcements. Meet the instructor, a link to my virtual office hours, syllabus and calendar, the virtual Zoom room, which we would all meet in there. Sometimes I would include a link to a conversation cafe in which the students could, it was more like a discussion board setting in which students post memes, videos, and other resources, and then my link to my modules, points, etc. Now, looking at what it looks like in Canvas, I like to keep my links to what the students need, and remove view of everything else. Please tell me if you do it differently or if it works for you better the other way. But these are the links that my students most need access to, and that's what I want to include in there. My default front page includes information about the class, the course description, and the syllabus, and a little bit about me that I couldn't include in here. Now, if we transition to what my modules look like, again, this is where I'm going to have a meeting outline with links to resources that my students may need. I may have my course activity. So I don't have an assignments link on the side. I have everything in the module because I like to avoid confusion. So moving on to user experience and wrapping things up, communication is a very important part of an online course, and things that you want to be able to tell your students from the get-go, of course, your office hours, your office number, or maybe the Zoom link where they can reach you at. Most of my students are graduate students, so they cannot come to campus, so we meet via Zoom. My response time policy, I'm very upfront about that at the beginning of the course. I put it in my course syllabus, and if I have a synchronous class with my students, that's something that I discuss with them. You know, within the week, I am a 24-hour kind of person. I likely respond to you. There's no guarantee that I'll be able to respond on the weekends. So I like to be upfront about that. Etiquette in terms of communication. Do you want to have your course number in the subject line? Do you expect to be addressed in a specific way? So those are things that are very important to communicate with students. But in addition to that, there are netiquettes that I include in my class that allow for more collaborative environment. So those netiquettes represent elements of respect, relevance, reciprocity, responsibility, and relationship of the students. And these are the example of the netiquettes that I tend to use. So I make sure that my students understand that we have to be respectful of each other's views, that people from different political, religious, cultural, linguistic backgrounds are coming together, and this agreement is part of the learning process, but we have to disagree within a rational, with the use of rational discourse. We are going to avoid swearing and profanity. We don't want to write in all caps because we don't want anyone to think that we're shouting. I do not like when we make assumptions, so the use of acronyms have to be spelled out. Also, we have to be respectful of privacy in terms of information and content that's shared online. And what does that mean in terms of sharing that content in the public? So again, we have to treat our course content with privacy. and avoid any type of misinformation, be accurate and factual. I mentioned this before already, but of course, providing access to resources. If there are any tutorials and demos that need to be included, those should be included within your module. And then I tend to do a navigation of my Canvas course when I first meet my students, because I have a synchronous online class. But if our first meeting is not a synchronous meeting, then I'm likely to create a navigation video so that the students are aware of where they can find information within the learning management system. I'm an avid user of announcements, as I previously mentioned. And I think in this day and age, because we don't only access our learning management system through a desktop device, we also access it online. It's important to do a series of device testings. So I have hopefully not overwhelmed you and share content that you find beneficial, maybe perhaps some of the content that you already practice on your own. But I'm curious to know if you have any questions or comments or recommendations. I'm always open to recommendations as well. Thank you everyone for listening attentively. I'm gonna go ahead and share a few links in the chat so you can have them. One of them is a link to the journal article. And another one is a link to a book that was just released yesterday. I am a co-author in a book chapter in the book, and it's called Critical Digital Pedagogy in Higher Education. It is available open access, and you can download the whole book for free. And it was published to Athabasca University Press. Thank you, everyone.